We went into the countryside, and we saw great evidence in the cities as well that the people are generally armed. The civilian militia is very large. The women share, for instance, the burden of anti-aircraft gunfire, defense of the city. We saw large numbers of men and women on the roofs of buildings preparing in the early stages of air alarms for the bombardment itself. And they said to us quite openly on several occasions, look, one of the most practical evidences of the truth that this government speaks for us is that the government has armed us, to the point where if we wanted, we could bring the government down in a day. And they themselves know this.
At the time that I was in North Vietnam, there obviously had not been any breaking of the morale of the people, either in the cities or, as far as I could observe, out in the villages, although they had been subjected to an extremely heavy bombardment. At that time, it was reaching the levels of World War II, and of course, since that time, has been much strengthened. The people of North Vietnam are young for the most part, and the war effort is largely on the backs of teenagers, not because they're running out of manpower, but because this is a young country.
There is nothing that has not been attacked. There is no thread that has not been tried to be burned or frayed or broken by us, and yet none of it has happened or it's been repaired in the night.
Altogether, I think one can say, objectively, that there isn't a town left standing apart from Haiphong and Hanoi.
So that there are hospitals, there are schools, there is a trusted government, and there are political leaders whom they don't hesitate to call loved and admired. Which is to say the war is not working. It's a very simple judgment, it's too simple for the complexities of our power. Perhaps in a deeper spiritual sense, too tough to face, because it means the end of the giant. It means the last days of Superman. It means that for those with the capacity of overkill, kill is not enough. The real thing required is to live in the real world. As Buber says, it is to be able to imagine the real world and imagine human beings. And as long as the dinosaur couldn't do it, he ended up on the museum shelf. And as long as Superman can't do it, he can raven and destroy, but he cannot give life, and he cannot even truly, as we know so bitterly, he cannot live himself.
The North Vietnamese always insist that they are winning this war, that they are not simply resisting. And when I talked to Prime Minister Pham Van Dong, he said, we are not under-bombing, we are facing the bombs. And at first I thought that this was mere propaganda, but seeing the North Vietnamese fighting in the country and in the towns, I think that psychologically it is true.
I was most interested to find that when I got to Hanoi, the authorities put no restrictions on what I wanted to send out. Prime Minister Pham Van Dong stressed in his talk with me the parallel between the ancient struggles of the Vietnamese people against the Chinese, the Manchus, and the Mongols, and their contemporary struggles for independence, which began, of course, under the French many years ago, were continued without interruption through World War II, then resumed again against the French, and are now being carried on against the Americans. Prime Minister Pham Van Dong turned to me at one point and said, Mr. Salisbury, how long do you want to fight? Would you like to fight for 10 years, 20, or 30? You pick the term of yours. We're ready to accommodate you. A rather bold statement, and maybe it had some bravado in it, but this is, again, in accordance with the spirit of the Vietnamese people.
There's no one in that society who doesn't remember hunger in his own lifetime. And it was interesting that from the peasants to the young intellectuals, when you posed the very same question, that is to say, what has the revolution meant, first of all, to you, you would get the same answer. We now have enough to eat, as simple as that. So that when the North Vietnamese government makes it its pledge of honor that the rice bowl will be filled, this is so great a thing that we can hardly conceive of it. It just seems to be off our radar. I think, for them, the question is, first of all, a very, very concrete one. That statement is literally true. And then again, it begins to move into the larger areas. The circumference of the bowl expands, and And you note that the revolution has meant a passion for education, a passion for grassroots involvement in their own future, their own social structures, their own politics. And that at the other end of that power, which they are trying to move upward after so many years of colonial powerlessness, at the other end of that power is standing a man who also has a rice bowl in his hand and whose poverty is equivalent, whose power has not separated himself from the fate of the majority, who can move in the same cheap cotton clothing and with dignity among them, and whose power is not an inferior backroom game or a game of marked cards under a table or a corrupt double talk such as we've gotten so used to in the chanceries of the West.
Yet there is one light of hope, and this is that throughout Vietnamese history, they had catastrophes. They had Chinese, Mongolians invasions, where whole provinces were destroyed. Because, you know, you are not the first people who destroy villages in Vietnam, unfortunately. And so they are used to that. And it's a great tradition that the village is not lost, even when it disappears from the surface of the ground, because the village is down below with the tradition, down below with the people, the ancestors who have made the country, literally. The country is handmade. There is not one square foot, I would say, a square thumb of the earth that has not been built as it is by the peasantry in the past. And this survives. And when, well, it after 100 years, a village comes back, the descendants of a village come back to the village, they find the village, and the village starts again.